My name is Gabby, if you've not already met me, and I'm founder of Diversity Alliance, and I'm really excited to share this month's campaign, and the focus is around cultural awareness, which I think is a really interesting topic, both in the workplace and within events when it comes to inclusivity and belonging, because it's often the little one kind of forgotten about, unless people kind of tell us their backgrounds or their cultures, or if they have particular needs based on that. We kind of don't really think or talk about it that much, I don't think. And I think we're missing out on a bit of a trick there, particularly when we are talking about creating that sense of a belonging. We don't want to be missing out certain groups, people. And when we talk about diversity, you know, we always talk kind of like about the obvious ones. So if that's representation based on color, whether that is disability, whether that is the LGBTQ community, but what about faith? What about customs? What about culture? So I don't actually have a huge amount of knowledge around this topic, actually. So this month I'm bringing in those who want to grow their knowledge with me and kind of share what they know. And I'll share a bit around what I know. And then, of course, always it's lovely to get your feedback. But as always, let me describe what I'm wearing in my background. So today I've got kind of like a pinky blue kind of jumpsuit on. I've got a gold chain on, got long dark hair, brown skin and red lipstick. And I'm in a different environment today. I've got a beige background and literally that is it, nothing else for me today. But it's time to move on to our first guest for this campaign, Dan Assor. I'm super excited to have him here today. And he is extremely influential within the events and exhibition and kind of business side of events. He's won a few accolades, definitely in those kind of like influential people within the industry. So Eventex, Glisser. So that's pretty cool accolades to have there. And also Dan has his own podcast as well, which we might hear a little bit around that. But let's stop hearing from me. And Dan, please just tell us a little bit more about yourself. And if you can introduce yourself, what you're wearing, what you look like, and that sort of stuff as well. For
sure. Thank you, Gabby. Nice to be on your show. Thanks for that introduction as well. It's always flattering, if not embarrassing at the same time. So what am I wearing? Probably not dressed as appropriately, but I'm just wearing a black top. I am definitely bald. I'm wearing glasses, as much as I try and refrain from doing so, but that's what I'm wearing today, and slightly unshaven.
You know, how we can kind of better support those of the Jewish faith in our workplaces and also within our events. We all talk a lot about what we can do for the LGBT community and disability and like Black History Month. It's all a little bit more obvious, but there's no such obvious kind of policies or initiatives or, you know, that sort of thing for those from the Jewish community. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about this. So I think there's probably 4 or 5 areas which you can relate to both work and events, actually. So starting off, and I've just mentioned it with the Sabbath.
Yep.
So definitely thinking about both in the workplace and from your event perspective, are you aware? It's an interesting one. How would you be aware? Because you wouldn't ask, but at least having it in your policies and procedures. So when you hand it to a new member of staff, they can actually see that if they want to do this, i.e. take off the Sabbath, they can put them, you know, they can feel comfortable. So, you know, because I did work in a business where obviously when I ran the Jewish newspaper, whoever wanted to leave early, you know, to adhere to the Sabbath, they could do. But outside of that, you know, do you have staff that want to leave early on a Friday? Because obviously when, you know, it could get dark and 4 o'clock on a Friday, right? So they'd have to go home probably at 2 o'clock to prepare for the Sabbath. So what do you do in that situation? Or do they have to take a half-day holiday, or do they get the option just to make up the hours? Or actually, do you not mind because you want a blended workforce? So that's something you're just going to give them, and they accept that that's a privilege, so they make it up. You do also have to be careful, and I've experienced this, that other people say, well, where's he going? Not me particularly, but he leaves at 2 o'clock every Friday. Is he making that up? Why is he doing that? So it's also making
flexible work policy and flexible working is really, we should be making use of that now, and not just for, you know, one particular kind of group of people, but how it can be utilized by anyone. And so actually there should be less judgment hopefully now around things like that with the flexible working.
Yeah, sure. But it's also explaining to other staff, and how do you do this, about why that's happening? Why is that individual getting up and leaving on a Friday?
Yeah.
right? I don't know the answer to that because you don't want to break confidences either. But at some
That
point,
comes to educating, I think. So sorry to interrupt you, Dan, but that means like actually having these kind of conversations. We talk about Diversity Alliance delivering lunch and learns around topics, building awareness around different topics. Definitely have lunch and learns with people from the Jewish community, whether that's experts coming in, whether that's, hopefully you've created a culture of belonging and inclusion anyway, whereby any Jewish colleagues would be like, oh, I'd be happy to share a little bit about me and my story, and having those conversations in the workplace, people get to know that these are some of the things that customs that are considered, and learn a bit more about the faith as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And also during the interview process, does someone feel comfortable at a certain level, maybe more junior level, telling somebody that should they tell them in advance before they got the job that they need to leave on a Friday early? Will that influence people's decision making? They're not going to admit it, possibly. But is it untoward to take a job and then say on the first week, by the way, I need to leave on Friday? So which way round should it be? So that's something to consider. The other thing
I would do, I would address that is, if I wasn't, not if I was the employer, if I was the interviewee, I would just find out as much about the flexible working policies as possible. Without necessarily, which is such a shame, without necessarily sharing the information about what I need to have every Friday off, which is already, if I'm thinking that's not.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So it means that we haven't got to a place where people yet feel comfortable doing that. Festivals, I guess, similar to the Sabbath, and I talk it from an events perspective, and it's interesting, this definitely happened at one of the businesses in a positive way, I guess because they had to. It was in the medical profession, and they felt that a lot of their delegates were from the Jewish community, so they definitely couldn't hold an event on certain festival days. And typically the event or trade show season is pretty prolific in September, October, and there are lots of religious festivals from a Jewish perspective. So every year, and it goes by the lunar calendar, so it's not set dates. So every year when we're planning, right, we can't do that conference on these days. So specifically Jewish New Year, which typically falls mid to end of September, early October. Similar Day of Atonement that I mentioned is 10 days after that. So whether you're trying to be accommodating or not, you need to, if you feel that you've got, and this is the same for any community, that you've got a good part of your delegates and or exhibitors coming from that community, make sure you don't plan it on festivals, whether you're doing it because you care or not. That's just an obvious thing. And there's lots of
actually a resource, Dan, as well around that some companies that I'm working with are adopting, and I'm sure many are adopting, and it is literally a cultural awareness calendar. So it sits within your intranet or whatever, so that people can access that and look for those key dates, for a wide variety of celebrations, festivals, all of that sort of stuff. So you actually pull that up and you can actually double check those dates and things like that.
There's as many as like 13 festivals. Now, if you're a religious Jew, again, coming back to sort of what kind of work you want to do you work for, and I know this, certain people I know will only work for firms where the senior management is Jewish, because they will accept and pretty much understand that the person in front of them is going to have to take off, up to 13 days plus leave early on a Friday. Now, there'll be a quid pro quo, but again, do you mention that in the interview process? Do you mention it the first day when you've taken a job and there's a bit of resentment? So there's always sort of things that I think you need to consider. Prayer times, again, would only come from a religious perspective, but religious Jews, like other ethnicities, will like to pray 3 times a day. Typically, the first one will be before work. But lots of people I know at lunchtime, especially in the city, will go to a synagogue or someone's office where they have a minimum of 10 Jews, which is called a minyan. You need a minimum of 10 to start a service. And so they would disappear off for an hour. Now, I'm sure people do that at the moment, come back and no one knows what they've been doing. So it comes back to education. Appearance. You've already spoken about me, but if you hired an Orthodox Jew, or even somebody that just wear the head covering, just be aware that, do they feel self-conscious wearing that in the office? I've been in offices where people say, can I try it on?
Oh gosh. That's the equivalent of the black afro, can I touch your hair? That's
Now, I'm sure, a lot of that comes from a good place. Is that appropriate, not appropriate? I've seen when head coverings have been thrown around the office,
Mm,
you know, in a playful way. But
mm,
again, I just think, you know, we need to be conscious of that.
mm.
Food, obviously, again, for events. I think this is done pretty well now. You know, especially at conferences or black tie dinners, making sure that you are asking, you know, different types of food. We all got it now with vegan and vegetarianism and plant-based and everything else. So I think the world has moved on and people accept that, you know, kosher is an option, like halal is an option. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, that's definitely changed over the years.
But we
Um,
cannot substitute, and I've been asked this before
yeah,
by an organizer, you cannot substitute kosher with halal. It's not the same
no,
thing. And that mistake has been made, and I've been asked that question. So that is, you know, something to be aware of.
yeah, absolutely. And even the venue I had my daughter's bat mitzvah at, the chap said, "Oh, we don't do kosher, we do halal. Is that all right?" You know,
Mm,
comes from a good place. It's basically the way the animals are killed, which is very similar. But if you're strictly kosher, it has to come from an abattoir which has been supervised by what they call a shomer, which is
yes.
essentially an individual that, you know, knows all the rules and regulations. So that's not an abattoir where halal meat is processed. So
Mhm.
whilst you can make the case that they're saying they're not, because it's not 100%, you know, adherent to the guidelines. Bereavement, I've made a note. So when a Jew dies, typically the funeral is done in quick fashion, like within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Which people find, oh, that's hard to believe. You know, my aunt unfortunately passed away, and you know, I don't know, the funeral hasn't happened for 3 weeks. So very different in the Jewish religion. So people might have to go off work sharpish, or that someone might be speaking at an event and said, I can't do it because someone's died. And you might get frustrated. So what do you mean? Well, you know, the event's tomorrow. The funeral might not be to next week, but that's not the case. So just being aware of that, and it comes back to education, as you said. So, and after the funeral, there's a period of mourning called the Shiva,
Mhm.
which you might have heard of, which typically is, I think, 5 to 7 days at one of the mourner's house. And again, that's every evening, and that can be quite tiresome, burdensome for the family. So it's being aware that people mention that or need time off. Does that fall under compassionate leave? Probably should do,
Yeah.
if there's a compassionate leave policy. So yeah, those are the sort of things that I think people need to adhere to, both in the workplace
Mm.
and at events.
Yeah, yeah, there's a really good, thank you for sharing those. I think summarize, hopefully I haven't forgot, so we will forget some, but those dates, so those being aware of those dates in the calendar, so we're not organizing booking. It doesn't even just have to be big events, it could be a leadership dinner or something like that, so really being aware of that. You also mentioned about not look, what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, so
Appearance.
appearance.
Yeah, appearance, prayers, prayer rooms, or people needed to go off, to go and attend prayers.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Festivals, holidays, yeah. That's
yeah,
all.
kosher, catering, etc. And as you said, it's all about policies, having them in place so that people feel, if they're coming from a Jewish background, they're starting in your workplace, that if these things are included or recognised in the policy, it gives that sense of inclusion and belonging already.
Sure.
And then the education piece as well. I think those are the two key pieces that
Yeah.
need to come together, and we need to make ourselves aware and call out any anti-Semitic behaviour, because it's, number one, despicable, and we need to, it's not a joke, and we need to not look at it as a joke and meaning it's banter, because actually it isn't. Even if we might go, do you know, I can brush it off,
Yeah.
you know, repetitive and repeatedly, sorry, I think it can wear people down. I think it can wear.